Now, on a slightly different topic, but one I do want to get into, some of us have been railing and railing about Uber for a very long time. It's become a joke around here. That is my rants about Uber. Well, you know, I'm going to say something positive, not about Uber, but about the environment we live in. It's finally catching on that not just Uber, but all the tech bros are really a problem. At long last, we're seeing our society is beginning to realize, I think is beginning to realize that wealth, even self-created wealth, is not a sign of inherent nobility, of personal value, or even necessarily of any particular talent. Our tech bro billionaires have shown the way in this. They've shown the world their true nature by doing what they do best, end runs around laws that were designed for the common good, by living lives of relentless, unbearable, and deeply embarrassing extraordinary self-regard and self-worship, and by turning once great cities of our country like San Francisco into vast living piles of sludge that are quickly approaching black hole event horizon proportions. The country is seeing these folks for what they are, and I, for one, have to say, I am delighted. I welcome the rejection of our new corporate overlords. Now, let me also say that our problem as a society is that it way precedes the tech bros. For too long, we've assumed that the wealthy had to be more admirable than ourselves, that wealthy was valuable for wealth's sake. We did that, we had those assumptions because we just, frankly, we kind of love wealth. And then what we would do is we retrofitted our perceptions of human value to fit whatever these guys were doing at the time, to fit the profiles of the people we might call the uber wealthy. See what I did there? That whole Uber, okay, never mind. It was even true of the counterculture in my day when I was coming up as a rock and roll musician. You know, people who first got into rock and roll or any form of music, blues, whatever, folk music, they did it, jazz, they did it for love of the music. They did it because it's what they wanted to do. But then money infected everything in the 60s. And so, you know, all these guys made so much money, the rock and roll stars, the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Stones and all that, that by the time I came along, kind of the next generation after that, it was kind of assumed that you had to be there wanting to make a lot of money. And if you dared say otherwise, you were in trouble. I mean, look, even people like John Lennon, who, great as he was driven by all kinds of terror and fear and all of those things, and you were expected to have that too. And by the way, if you don't think John Lennon was driven by terror and fear, listen to Working Class Hero sometimes. There's this great line from the movie Backbeat, which is about the Beatles' early days, and it was it was based on a memoir written by a woman who knew them in Germany. There's a great line where John Lennon, where she asks John Lennon, "Why are you so angry all the time?" And he says, "I'm not angry, sister, I'm desperate." And you were expected to be desperate if you did rock and roll. It was a business by the time I came along. I remember I had a manager, and he was Blondie's manager, actually, and so now you can figure out who he is. And he said to me once, when we were having a little tension, he said, "Richard, how much money do you want to make?" And, you know, I thought I was being greedy, so I said, "I don't know, $50,000 a year." And in my defense, by the way, that was big money back in those days. It was like what surgeons made or something. And he said, "You're not hungry enough." That was his answer to me. "You're not hungry enough." And pretty soon he fired me. Now, the deal in our country is that capitalism wants you hungry. It wants you envious. It wants you trapped in an endless rotating cage of agonizing inferiority where the only possible escape we can imagine is by getting more and more and more. Once that gets its hooks into you, you're stuck. And that is basically what we're dealing with today. Once it gets its hooks into you, you can't escape, and it doesn't want us to escape. You know, a great Buddhist teacher from Thailand once used the analogy of this kind of addiction to greed to being knocked out by a boxer. He said the trick is you got to duck before he slugs you. You've got to recognize the addiction before it gets you. Desperation is the punch that knocks you out. And I'm not saying that from a high and mighty position. I spent years and years of my life driven by the same kind of desperation, the same kind of fear. So believe me, I'm not talking from a position of superiority at all. I've been punished when I wasn't desperate enough. I've suffered as a result of being too desperate. Believe me, I've been through it. But now, at least today, I know that it was society that was instilling that fear in me and in all of us, so that we don't think cooperatively or collectively. Even though I was a lefty by background, I didn't do it. And so that I would just fight for my personal survival at all costs. The terrified don't cooperate unless they're very evolved. And trust me, I wasn't that evolved. The virtue of the tech bros, and I include, by the way, older tech bros like Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, in this, is that they're addicts, and they've shown us that they're addicts. They can never have enough money. They have more money than they can spend in 100,000 lifetimes, but they still want more. Why? I don't know, so they can win, I guess, before they die, like everybody else. But by showing us that addiction, they've shown us the trap of capitalism. They're so desperate to win, these guys, that they're willing to spend their entire waking lives in frantic pursuit of the idiotic and trivial, apps to call a car or whatever, news terminals or whatever, and to pretend that they're doing something meaningful, all on the long shot chance that they might become fabulously rich, or if they're already fabulously rich, that they might even get that more, a little more. But what they do isn't even that smart. The really smart people invented the technology that they're working off of. They're the ones who did it, the people who were working for government contracts to design the hardware, to design the principles of the software, to design the internet itself. So most of that was done by genuinely smart people, but the tech bros, they haven't invented much of anything. They're sociopaths with silly ideas. They're lame sociopaths whose only idea is to build a monopoly market share so that they can shaft the very people who have made us so ungodly, or rather have made them so ungodly rich. They make meaningless products that add nothing to the sum total of human capital, of human happiness, I should say. Don't do it. Don't play their game. I don't want to play their game. Don't play capitalism's game. Don't internalize their consciousness. Do something better with your life. And I don't mean to lecture. It took me a long time to figure it out myself, and I'm still working on it. But believe me, you have better things to do with your time, and so do I.